Good morning. I hope this video finds everyone well today. I am Tara Kelly, instructor of English at the University of North Florida. And in this video, I'm going to talk about Asao Inoue's community-based assessment pedagogy. In this reading, Inoue is situating himself within a conversation that's already been going on. And he presents this conversation and his piece as part of that ongoing conversation by saying that he is particularly responding to Huat. Now, when academics respond, they aren't necessarily responding in a negative way. Sometimes they're responding in a very positive way. Always they want to add something to the conversation. They're not going to respond and say, I agree with somebody. In a response, in an academic response, we are trying to further the conversation in some meaningful way. Inoue is saying that he's responding to Huat by saying he's positioning himself in the conversation of active learning, self-assessment, and reflective writers, and that he is trying to build a model that does these things. So what he says on page 110 when he's outlining his paper, he says, in response to Inoue, he wants to, and this is a quote, say that and argue that when students assess and reflect on rubrics and their assessment practices in public spaces, it helps them become more critical, self-conscious, and hopefully better writers. And this is what his argument is. He says that based on his model, this is what he's trying to do. And he says that within this, students are becoming a very active part of the assessment practice through rubrics. And so students are producing the rubrics that are being done in class. He presents the first one and then they build upon that. And he says that final grades are determined by portfolios. And what he is doing is he is trying to fight or trying to present something different than the traditional notions of grading. And so he has a section where he talks about this, and he says that he wants to take away from the fact that instructor feedback often carries the most weight, and he feels that that's not the way that writing happens, that instructor feedback should no longer take the most important weight in the conversation. And so he presents then, after outlining all of this, after outlining his theory, he says, now based on this theory, I've created a course. And he says that this course is a place where students post their work online in a discussion board, and that throughout the course the students develop rubrics, and that each iteration of the rubric is more complex and more developed and helps the students talk more and more deeply about the writing being done in the class, and that students respond and assess one another. And he says, again, it is more than just response. It's not, I like this, I don't like this. It is this idea of assessing. And so starting on page 125, he talks about the difference between assessing and responding, and he gives lots of student examples. And so this is what a good researcher does, is they will present theory and then they will give examples to illustrate that theory and to illustrate their point. And he is saying that assessment is very important and that students are assessing each other, and that helps create better writing in his argument. And he also says that within that we reflect, that students should be reflecting, and that reflection is the key, and he uses that word key. And then he says that reflecting can help students identify problems they are having, and that's on page 130. And he says that through reflection, students are not only just talking about the writing of others and assessing each other, but when they respond, they're internalizing that and then developing their own theories, and ultimately that is his argument, and we'll get to that in a second. Throughout all of this, he says that we're fighting the traditional, there are two people. There's the student and the instructor gives all the feedback. He's saying, no, there's more than that, it's a community. So he brings in all of the students and says it's a community, and that's where it comes in, this community-based assessment practices. So he talks about community, he says why it's important to have a sense of community, and hint, that's on page 132 to 133. You can read more about why he says this. And then After he presents his course, he comes back to that academic conversation that he was positioning himself into. So he comes back to who out. It's really important for you to understand the structure of Inoue's argument. He starts with saying, hi, I'm Inoue, and I am positioning myself within this argument, and that Huat started this discussion of this type of pedagogy, and here's my iteration of this. This is what I'm trying to do with Inoue's theory, and then I am developing it in this new way. And so in the end, that final section, he comes back and says, these are the parts of Huat's argument that I'm answering, and this is what I'm adding to the conversation, and he brings in additional researchers in that, saying that his work belongs within this larger academic conversation, and everything has to do with being part of this academic conversation. So he comes back to Huat and says what it is that he's responded to, and then he also brings in 3 other really important theorists. You as a student, new to this conversation, might not realize that these are pretty big names in the field of education. Paulo Freire talks about critical pedagogy, and Inoue says how he has internalized some of the concepts and ideas of Freire. He also talks about Bartholomew, another big name in education. He says how he answers some of what Bartholomew says we need to do in the classroom. And he also invokes bell hooks. Please note, bell hooks is somebody whose critical pedagogy means to kind of fight against the power. So if we think about these ideas of power struggles, both Freire and bell hooks are fighting against the power, which is one of the reasons why bell hooks has a name that she chose, and she lowercases her entire name. So do not uppercase her name when you cite her. She is bell hooks, and he says how he responds to her conversation as well. So Inoue has brought all of this back into this conversation, this academic conversation. And he ends by very clearly restating his thesis statement and what it is that he is trying to do in the academic conversation. And what he does is he says students might actually theorize for themselves. So he says that the idea isn't for the instructor to give all of the theory to the students, but that students can develop their own theories on assessment and on writing practices. And so this entire piece is talking about what Inoue does within his classroom. So that has to be summarized. What is it that Inoue does? What is his process? But also, how does Inoue position himself with the larger conversation? What is he saying that he's adding to this larger academic conversation? So those are 2 pieces that should be in a summary when you are summarizing Inoue. I hope that this information in this video has helped. Good luck on your summary revisions, and have a great day.